Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Okay, good evening, everybody. Last week we started to study Sutta number 33 in the Majjhima Nikaya. This is called the Mahāgopālaka Sutta, the greater discourse on the Cowherd. And in discussing this sutta, I began right off with paragraph 15. In the sutta, the Buddha explains 11 ways in which a cowherd is incapable of taking care of a herd of cattle. And then he uses these 11 terms as points of comparison with a monk who is incapable of growth, progress, and fulfillment in the Dhamma and discipline. And then the Buddha explains or elaborates on each of these 11 ways in which a monk fails in the Dhamma. Okay, then in paragraph 15, the Buddha explains how when a cowherd possesses 11 qualities, then he's capable of looking after a herd of cattle. The Buddha mentions the 11 qualities. And then in the next paragraph, the Buddha draws out the analogy, the comparison, by enumerating 11 ways in which a monk is capable of growth, progress, and fulfillment in the Dhamma and discipline. He uses the same terms that he used when describing the cowherd, the competent cowherd. Then he explains each of these points, giving it a meaning derived from the Dhamma. And so last week we took the first of these, which is knowledge. The monk, like the cowherd, has to have knowledge of form, which in the case of the monk means knowledge, understanding of the nature of materiality, of material form. Understanding all material form as consisting of the 4 great elements and the types of matter derived from the 4 great elements. The second is being skilled in characteristics, which means knowing how a fool is characterized by his actions and how a wise person is characterized by his actions. The third is picking out flies' eggs, which means that the monk doesn't tolerate arisen unwholesome thoughts, but abandons them and eliminates them. And then the fourth is dressing wounds, which in the case of the monk means guarding the doors of the sense faculties so that the mind doesn't grasp upon the signs and qualities, signs and features of things. Okay, so that is what we covered last week. Now we will go on and complete the sutta. Okay, so the fifth quality of the capable cowherd is that he smokes out the sheds, the cow sheds. I guess the cow sheds get filled with flies over time, and also maybe the urine and the excrement of the cows, they have to be cleaned out. And then to clean out the smell of the sheds, the cowherd has to smoke the sheds. This is my assumption. I really don't know anything about looking after cows. Okay, and so when we apply this quality to the monk, how is it that a monk smokes out the sheds? And here the Buddha says the monk teach others in detail the Dhamma as he has learned it and mastered it. I have to confess, I don't see very clearly the connection between teaching the Dhamma and smoking out sheds. Anybody who has experience with cows? Is there anybody here who can give some hint as to the connection?
Well, maybe the Dhamma is a way of sort of cleaning out or clearing up or taking away impurities.
Oh, that's a good idea. A good suggestion. Maybe the way the smoke clears out the flies, the bad odors within the shed. So teaching the Dhamma is able to sort of smoke out the defilements in the minds of others. In any case, this particular paragraph here shows that the Buddha places emphasis on the need for teaching the Dhamma, and not simply teaching it, but teaching it in detail. The Buddha says in detail. And then he uses two words to indicate the process of learning. In Pali, it's yatha sutang, yatha pariyatang. Sutang actually means hearing, as one has heard it. So this is like the first stage in the process of learning is to hear the Dhamma. In the Buddha's day, texts or the Buddha's discourses were not written down in the form of books. The teaching was always transmitted orally. And so in order to learn the Dhamma, one has to live in the presence of the Buddha or of very learned monks and nuns and listen to them teach the Dhamma. So first one listens, and then comes yatha pariyatang. This pariyatang implies mastering the teaching. And what is involved in mastering is that after one has learned the teaching by listening, then one has to memorize the teaching. Get it by memory. If not word for word, but one has to get the main topics in the teaching by memory. Then one has to practice recitation. This is part of the process of memorization, is to recite out loud. Because when one recites out loud, that impresses the teaching upon the mind so that one can retain it better. And even in these days when we have printed books, but in the traditional Buddhist countries, monks still learn the teaching by memory and by recitation. So that, for example, in Burma today, there are several monks who have memorized, who know by memory, the entire Tripitaka. That's some 40 volumes. Even my own teacher, he used to, in his training when he was a young monk in Sri Lanka, he was taught to memorize the teachings. So he learned several volumes by memory. And then when he was interested in learning English, he used to correspond with Mrs. Rhys Davids, who at that time was the president of the Pali Text Society. And she sent him some of her volumes of translation from the Sutta Pitaka, published by the Pali Text Society. And the way he learned English was to memorize these volumes that she sent. And so he spoke a very good British English. Okay, so one memorizes, recites out loud as a way of reinforcing the memorization. Then one has to examine the meaning in order to understand the meaning. And then after understanding the meaning through reflection and examination, then ideally one has to put the teaching into practice and then penetrate it by direct insight. Okay, and so after one learns the teaching and then masters it, at least to some extent, then one continues the heritage of the teaching, the heritage of the Dhamma, by teaching the Dhamma to others in detail. Okay, then we come to the next point, which is knowing the watering place. This is quite clear in the case of the cowherd looking after the herd of cattle. The cows have to drink from time to time, and so the cowherd has to lead them, guide them to the watering place. And so in the case of the monk, it's interesting here, the Pali word for the watering place is tita, which actually means a ford. It's a place where one crosses the river. And the Sanskrit equivalent is tirtha. And in Indian spirituality, the word tita takes on a special meaning of being a spiritual teaching, a body of doctrines and practices which one uses as a means for crossing over the river or ocean, the stream of samsara, of birth and death. And so a spiritual school or a religious sect in India during the Buddha's time was known sometimes as a titayatana. It means a place for crossing the ford. It means a ford, a place for crossing the stream. And so here it's natural that those who are very learned in the tradition should be compared to a tita, that's a place for crossing over. Okay, and so the Buddha explains now how a monk knows the watering place, or the ford for crossing over. And the Buddha explains here, a monk goes from time to time to those bhikkhus who have learnt much, who are well versed in the tradition, who uphold, maintain the Dhamma, the Vinaya, and then the text uses a word here which is translated as the codes. The Pali word for this is matika. Okay, so we have the monks who uphold or maintain the Dhamma, that's the doctrine. Then the discipline, this is, in Pali, this is Vinaya, which over time came to designate the body of monastic rules and regulations. I think probably in the earliest phase of Buddhism, Vinaya or discipline meant simply the practice, the whole practice that led to liberation, whereas the Dhamma would be the doctrine. But over time, the word Dhamma came to designate the suttas or discourses of the Buddha, and then Vinaya or discipline came to designate the body of monastic rules with their explanations and the various regulations governing the monastic orders. Then the third term is used here is the codes, which in Pali is matika. And these codes came to play a very important role in the development of Buddhist thought. The codes were probably summaries of the doctrine in the form of lists. These would be lists of, for example, the 37 factors of enlightenment, or 37 aids to enlightenment. Things like doctrinal principles, like the 5 aggregates, the 12 sense bases, the 18 elements, the 12 factors of dependent origination, the 4 noble truths. So these were outlines of the main points of the doctrine. And what happened over time to the matikas? The matikas became, this is according to the opinion of modern scholars, the matikas became the origin of that branch of teaching, Buddha's teaching, called the Abhidhamma. Because as the matikas were passed on from generation to generation, learned monks would start to elaborate on the matikas, to provide them each of the main terms with definitions, explanations. And so originally the matikas were probably a condensation of the teaching, a summary of the teaching. But as the matikas came to be explained in detail, elaborated, worked into a system, they became bigger and bigger until they turned into an extremely complicated, elaborate systematization of the teaching. And that is what we call the Abhidhamma. Okay, so from this passage we see that sort of the ideal for the learned monk is to know the Dhamma, the discipline, and these codes, that the matika. And so when a monk has questions, then he goes to these learned monks and asks questions of them, asking, how is this? What is the meaning of this? And then these elder learned monks reveal to them what has not been revealed. They clarify what is not clear, and they remove his doubts about the various things that give rise to doubt. Okay, so this aspect also shows another side to the teaching of the Dhamma, except in paragraph 21, where the monk is smoking out the sheds, this is where a monk, after learning the Dhamma, takes the initiative in teaching it to others. But in the case of knowing the watering place, here we have a monk who has many doubts, questions, doesn't know how to resolve them on his own. And so he seeks out those elder monks who are highly learned and questions them in order to get his doubts dispelled. Okay, we go on to paragraph 23. How does a bhikkhu know what it is to have drunk? Okay, now the answer that the Buddha gives is that when the Dhamma and discipline proclaimed by the Tathagata is being taught, a monk gains, here we have a special word, I'll write it on the board, he gains inspiration in the meaning, he gains inspiration in the Dhamma, he gains gladness connected with the Dhamma. We have two important expressions here. These two expressions are Attaveda, which is translated here, inspiration in the meaning, and Dhammaveda, which is translated inspiration in the Dhamma. And then the key word here is the word Veda, translated very roughly as inspiration. And now, if you know anything about Indian religious history, then you know that sort of the root scriptures of the Indian spirituality within the fold of Brahmanism are called the Vedas. The Vedas are taken by the Brahmins and then later by all later Hindu philosophers and religious thinkers to be divinely revealed sacred scriptures. They are, you could say, the Vedas for the Brahmins are the voice of Brahma, the voice of the divine reality. The Buddha, of course, as a non-Brahminic religious teacher, did not accept the authority of the Vedas. In fact, we could say the Buddha, along with the founder of Jainism, Mahavira, was a rebel against the authority, the authoritarianism of the Vedas. But the Buddha took over this word Veda and then gave it a meaning within his own system where, let's say first that the root of the word Veda is vid, which means to know. Okay, so the root of the word Veda is vid, which means to know. And thus from this root vid we get the word vijja, which plays the important role in Buddhism. Vijja is higher knowledge, liberating knowledge. And this is contrasted with its opposite. What is the opposite of vijja? Avijja, which means ignorance. Okay, so one nuance, one meaning within this word Veda is knowledge. But in the Buddhist text, from the same root vid, we also get the noun Vedana. Vedana means feeling. So the word Veda suggests both knowledge and feeling. You could say it's a knowledge which is infused with feeling, or it's a feeling which originates from knowledge. The two ideas of knowledge and feeling are both integrated within this one word, Veda, which is what makes it difficult to translate adequately into English. And so I'm not sure whether it was Venerable Nyanamoli or I myself who came up with inspiration. But that's what is used in this translation. So, when listening to the Dhamma, we could say that the monk, as he comes to understand it, to gain some insight into it, then he feels uplifted, excited, motivated, or we can say inspired. And then we also have in this expression Attaveda. The word atta also has two meanings, or even three meanings. One meaning of atta is, in fact, meaning. So atta means meaning. And that's the way it's translated here. But atta also means good. Good or benefit. And then from this meaning of good or benefit, there comes the third meaning, which is the goal or purpose. And so all of these three ideas are compressed within this word atta. And so as one is listening, as one understands the meaning, one feels inspired. As one recognizes the good or benefit, one feels inspired. And as one comes to gain some sense of the goal, one feels inspired. Okay, and often we get this Attaveda and Dhammaveda paired together. It seems inspiration in the Dhamma is the inspiration that comes directly from the doctrine, understanding the doctrine, whereas inspiration in the meaning is what comes from understanding the meaning of the doctrine, or from experiencing the benefits of the doctrine. Okay, and then closely connected with this is gaining gladness or joy connected with the Dhamma. And so this is said to be like drinking, because it's an experience. Sometimes we say that as he is sitting there, one drinks in the teaching. In the Dhammapada we have the verse Dhamma piti sukhang seti. Because anavilena cetasa, one who drinks in the Dhamma sleeps peacefully or lives happily with a clear, undefiled mind. Okay, so this is how a monk knows what it is to have drunk. Okay, now after the cows have drunk the water at the watering place, the cowherd has to lead them back to the pasture. And in order to lead them back, what does he have to know? He has to know the road. Okay, so this seems to be actually constituting something of a pattern here. One listens to the Dhamma, one clarifies doubts by asking elder monks one's questions, then one listens to the Dhamma and gains the inspiration. Then one has to put what one learns into practice by following the road, following the path, and then that path is the Noble Eightfold Path. Okay, we've explained the Noble Eightfold Path several times in the past, so I'm not going to explain it now. But this is, in a general way, the path of practice. And as one proceeds along this Noble Eightfold Path, one eventually comes to the pastures. Here the word pasture, again there's a play on words, is gochara. Yeah, the word gochara is actually a compound of two parts. The word go means cow, and chara means to move about. So the pasture is a place where the cows move about. That's the original sense of gochara. But the word gochara came to be used in Buddhism to mean the place where the mind moves about. So it takes on the extended meaning of, you could say, the objects of the mind, or the area in which the mind moves about. And so it's said that one has to avoid a bad gochara and stick to a proper or good gochara, the proper pasture. And then there are several suttas in the Samyutta Nikaya. This is in the chapter on Satipatthana Samyutta, chapter 47, in which the Buddha speaks about the four foundations of mindfulness, the four Satipatthanas, as being the proper gochara, the proper pasture for a monk in training. Okay, so here the Buddha uses this wordplay of the word gochara, which on the one hand means the pasture where a cow goes to graze, and also it means the object of the mind, especially the proper object of the mind for one in training. And he designates this proper domain of the mind to be the four foundations of mindfulness. Okay, the next quality, it's said that the cowherd, when he's taking care of the cows, he should not milk them dry. Again, I don't have experience looking after cows. I don't know the reason for that. But there must be some reason why the cowherd should not completely milk the cows so that all of the milk is extracted. And similarly, it's said that it's proper for the monk not to milk dry. And what is meant by this? Here, the Buddha points out that what often happens is that lay people with faith and with devotion to the Sangha invite a monk to take as much as he likes of robes, alms food, resting places, and medicinal requisites. So they will say, if you need a robe, please let me know. I will be happy to provide a robe. If you need a meal, please let me know. I'll be happy to prepare a meal for you. If you need a place to live, let me know, and I'll be happy to arrange to build maybe a hut for you, or to provide medicines for you. So in this case, the Buddha says it's quite appropriate for the monk to accept this offer from the lay people. It's a way of giving the lay people a chance to acquire punya, or meritorious karma, by making the offerings. But the Buddha says, when one accepts, one has to also recognize that lay people provide these things from money that they earn or from their own property, their own possessions. And so one should not take advantage of them by making excessive demands. If you need a robe, okay, accept a robe, but don't say, I'd like to have 5 or 6 robes. I like one sort of brownish, what do you call this, a burgundy color like this. I also like, when I go to town, to wear a copper-colored robe. And maybe I have one, a little brownish robe, and then one bright red for when I go out on the town. So one doesn't make excessive demands. If one asks for a meal, one should not say, this is my menu, please serve me caviar from... Okay, so one has to be moderate in accepting things that are being offered by householders. Okay, and then we come to point 11, which is called, okay, in relation to the cowherd shows extra veneration to those bulls who are the fathers and leaders of the herd. That is, the cowherd has to give special consideration to the elder bulls, since they're the leaders. He shouldn't neglect them. And so in relation to the monk, the Buddha says the monk should show extra veneration to those elder bhikkhus of long standing, who have long gone forth, the fathers and leaders of the Sangha. And how does he do so? This is done through loving kindness, by showing loving kindness towards the elders through one's bodily actions, taking care of them, providing them with things that they need, helping them look after, take care of their daily tasks. If they have difficulty shaving them, helping them take bath, providing them with food. So we could see the way Venerable Guocheng looks after Shifu, again with bodily acts of loving kindness. Okay, and then second way is through verbal acts of loving kindness, speaking to them politely, respectfully, gently, and then maintaining mental acts of loving kindness towards them. That is, by developing the thoughts, the mind of loving kindness towards them. Okay, and so that is showing extra veneration to the elders in the Sangha. Okay, and then the Buddha concludes by saying, when a bhikkhu possesses these 11 qualities, then he's capable of growth, progress, and fulfillment in this Dhamma and discipline. Okay, now that we finished, I'll ask whether there's any questions. Okay, Peter?
The word atta, which means meaning,
Yeah.
but also means good, benefit, goal, or purpose. This reminds me of a discussion in Aristotle, the Nicomachean Ethics, where he talks about ends and goods and purposes and goals as all sort of the same. And I'm wondering if the meaning of the word atta, which can mean good, it's good in the sense of what was the good of that action, as opposed to morally good?
It's good in the first sense. What is the good of that action, rather than moral good? Moral good, I think the word that would be used in Pali would be kalyana. Yeah. Or even kusala, you could say. Kusala or kalyana. Okay, George?
This is the first sutta where I run into the word, the code. I don't recall seeing it elsewhere.
We haven't come across this word matika previously. Let me just take a quick look in the index. In fact, it's not indexed. I'm not sure whether it occurs elsewhere in the Majjhima Nikaya. I know it occurs in several suttas in the Anguttara Nikaya. I don't think so, because definitely I think that the word matika would have been used by the Buddha during his lifetime. It could have been towards the later part of his lifetime, where these lists of technical terms or of doctrinal terms had been compiled into some kind of body that was transmitted. We have to remember, in this period, I said that the matika is the source of the Abhidhamma, but this doesn't mean that the Abhidhamma, as we know it, had existed during the Buddha's time. So of course, the texts do use the expression Abhidhamma, but not in the sense of this codified body of teachings. Any further questions? Okay, if no further questions, then I want to just go rather quickly through the next sutta,